Thank you all for coming on a Monday night. It's a pretty cold day in January. Maybe a good time of the year to talk about being on the trainer since the roads are kind of crappy. So on behalf of Dark Horse, welcome, Andrew. Andrew Watson is a coach. He's got a pretty good resume of things. I'll let maybe Andrew, you can give us a little bit of more detail, but it's a good opportunity for us to all talk and listen to our favorite topic being on the trainer, sort of a means to an end, but maybe get some pointers, and we're gonna all be a little more road ready in a couple of months. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you, John. I'm gonna quickly go into the share screen mode, so bear with me as I get that set up. I just have to reconfigure my screens a little bit. Make sure I'm seeing what I want to see. Get the chat box. Okay. Bear with me another 10 seconds. Okay. Is everybody able to see my screen where it says structured training, world-class basics?
Yes.
And okay. So I will hit the next slide. Hopefully everything advances. Okay, so hopefully the slide changed there. And you can see a few photos. Okay, I'm seeing a couple people nodding. Good stuff. So that's me. A couple quick photos of myself. People are always asking me to send them photos, and I have very, very few photos of myself, especially coaching. But I was able to grab a few there. I am a cycling coach. In a previous life, I was a professional mountain bike racer with a side of cyclocross thrown in. I do private coaching, skills development, just consultations with athletes, and youth development as well. That's a big passion of mine, and I help run a youth development program up in Horseshoe Valley, and also some coach developments as well. So I'm an NCCP coach facilitator. So I run coaching courses, and there's also a few of my coordinates there if he wants to get in touch or follow up with any questions. AWIcoaching.com. You'll have seen that logo in the email. If you Google that, you should be able to see. So I've been told I might be breaking up. Hopefully you can hear. A question. Viewer turn off the share, go back to all faces that want to be seen, and we can do a voice town hall towards the end. So really quickly, I wanted to chatting about trainer basics, but I also want to chat about training. So I kind of broke this presentation into two. So part one is going to be training. And then once we know the basics of training, the world-class basics of training, we'll move into part two, and how do we move that onto the trainer? And then how do we then move that back out onto the road come spring? So that's kind of the format for tonight. So actually, I'm going to go back one slide. So I can miss my definition there. So what is training? Very simply, it's applying a physiological stress to elicit an improved physiological state from our baseline fitness. And think of your baseline fitness as what you do day to day, week in, week out, and you've adapted to it. Maybe you've plateaued. Think about even going to the gym and you can't really lift much more weight. That might be a bit of a baseline. But we want to add a stress, and that's called training. So how do we do that effectively? A couple of physiological adaptations for endurance sports that we're going for is utilizing oxygen and this is very simple, but I just want to highlight a few. So think about utilizing oxygen at the muscle itself, training our muscles, training our muscle cells to use oxygen to create energy. Then, so that's a very localized adaptation. Then if we think about bigger picture, delivering oxygen to those working muscles, so that's our heart and our lungs, among other things. Converting fats and carbs into energy. That's a big part of training as well, big part of adaptations. Training our bodies to burn fat better as an energy source, but also to preserve carbohydrates as an energy source. And also building fatigue resistance or durability. And this is one that I think my prediction is in the next 6 months, you're going to hear a lot more about this. This concept. It really isn't anything new, but it seems to be kind of picking up in the broader sports world, is fatigue resistance. And simply put, that's being able to perform well after you're tired. So we all think of ourselves as athletes who can do X amount after a bit of a warm up, then we perform a 5-minute test or a 3-minute test or a ramp test, let's say. Now you're going to go ride for 2 or 3 hours and go do the exact same test. Are you able to repeat the performance? And that's what fatigue resistance works on, or how we define durability. So here's another visual representation of training and that baseline fitness. So baseline's that blue line right in the middle. And it's really important to note that training makes you worse. Training should make you tired. And it's the recovery and the rest that actually makes you better. So we train, we get tired, we get fatigued, and then as we rest and recover, our fitness increases from that baseline. And that duration there, that duration is going to change a bit, but think of it as around a month to 6 weeks in time. So as athletes, how do we decide what to focus our stress on? And very simply put, this is the job of a coach. This is my job whenever I start working with a new athlete, or am trying to solve a problem. And sometimes those problems are getting an athlete to the finish line first. Sometimes it's just getting an athlete to the finish line, or getting an athlete to finish 100 kilometers at an 8-hour solo event. And that is determining the demands of the event and comparing those to the abilities of the athlete. So the demands of the event will take on a few different forms, but simply put, duration is one of the first things I would look at. So how long is the event, both in time or distance? Is the event a single day race? Is it a stage race? Is it an omnium? Is it an enduro race? What is the intensity profile of that event? Is it more like a time trial, a road race, which is very punchy, a cross race, which is also very punchy, or a cross country Olympic race? Each one of those events is going to have a slightly different intensity profile and have different demands for an event. So again, kind of simply put, if I was to compare 2 athletes and use Paris to Ancaster as an example, and using more specifically the 70K version of Paris to Ancaster, or whatever that ends up being, you might have 2 riders doing the exact same distance. Rider A might be aiming for about 2 hours, maybe a little bit over, and they're in the front of the race. It's going to be very tactical. They're going to be riding sub-threshold for much of the race, and they're going to be thinking about, how do I have a lot of energy for that last climb? And anybody who's done Paris to Ancaster will know what I'm talking about. And then rider B, who might be doing the exact same distance, they might be just they may have done it 1 year in 4 hours, and next year they're trying to do it in 3.5 hours. They might just be barely hanging on, maybe a lot of riding on their own. And it's going to be more of an endurance or stamina feat for them. Maybe they walk the climb, the next year is to ride the climb. So that's where I would, bring in the abilities of the athlete whenever developing a training program. So whenever you think about the events that you're doing this spring or summer, consider some of those factors when developing your training or talking to a coach, or try to break down those events. So chatting about world-class basics and world-class training basics, one of the keys is consistency. And if we take a 4-week view, and the next few examples I use are all 36 hours of training in 4 weeks. And step one to strive for is to have consistent training. And in this example, I'm using hours. You can use, some people use training stress score, TSS. In running terms, it might be mileage. No matter how you measure volume or training, the same principles apply. I just use hours as that's somewhat straightforward and what we use a lot in cycling. And so in this example, it's 3 10-hour weeks and then a rest week of about 6 hours. That would be the step one is are you able to structure a month that looks something like that, or at least pretty close to it? And again, that's those 10-hour weeks, that's training. So you might be getting worse over those 10 hours. You might be feeling fatigued. Your heart rate might be depressed by the end. Your power numbers might feel harder. Your power zones might feel harder. But then in that 6-hour week, that's where you recover and then hopefully move up to a new baseline. So the next example would be consistency plus some progression. And an example of that, again, this is that same 36-hour month, would be a 9 hours, 10 hours, 11 hours. Each week gets a little bit longer, a little bit more volume, a little bit more training stress, and then recovery week. So that's progression added in. What we want to try to avoid is binge training or inconsistent training, where your volume might be very lumpy. And sometimes this is just life. But as much as possible, we want to maintain as either consistent training or progressive training when we think about our structure. So hopefully those take. So if we take an 8-week view of training or 2-month view of training, what that might look like is, and adding in some progression, is the second month is going to add a little bit more volume. So not only is it progression over a 1-month period, but also 2-month period. And again, with those recovery weeks thrown in for to make sure that we recover, we adapt, we absorb the training, and we move to a higher baseline of fitness. And then I move out to 4 months, and this is base training. This is great for the winter. In a perfect world, our training, our structure would look something like this, where every 4 weeks we do a little bit more work as we build fitness. And then drilling down towards a weekly structure and a few ideas for that. A classic working Monday to Friday or student week might look something like this, where Mondays and Fridays would be lower days or lower stress days, maybe even complete rest days. And then the Tuesday through Thursday is some training, whatever that training might look like. Then another little bit of a block on the weekend if we have a little bit more time. So that's one example of how to structure a week. And here's a second example of somebody, again, might be working a 9 to 5 on a Friday, Monday to Friday. We might kind of do a bit of a build for the first 3 days. Thursday might be off, and then another build Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So again, just adding some structure to our training. Then getting into some workout examples. If we break those down really simply, we either think about steady state workouts, endurance workouts that might be fairly consistent. We kind of pick a intensity level and we stick to it. I like to add these in as well, these progressive endurance examples where the intensity might increase just a little bit. We're still in our endurance training zone, but the ride's getting a little bit harder towards the end. And hopefully not getting easier towards the end. Hopefully we can maintain our performance throughout an endurance ride. Then the second very simple classic workout would be an interval session. So you'd have a warm-up phase, getting ready to do the intervals, then the main set, and that's going to entail several intervals, hard on sets and then off recovery sets. You might do multiple sets, and then there's many different variations of this, and then a cool down phase as well. So those would be the two main types of workouts that we might see in our training. And you'll see if you're on a Zwift training program or a Training Peaks training program, you'll probably recognize one or both of those. This slide I added really quickly, and today, winter is another great time to, I'm kind of coming to the end of training and training principles right now. So if you have any questions, now is a great time to ask about just training in general. I wanted to just add something quick about learning how each one of these zones feels. And you've probably seen these training zones levels or some that do endurance, several different how each one of these zones feels for you while you're inside training and you don't have any other distractions, and you're not trying to keep up to other people. How do those training zones feel for you? And each one of those zones is going to have a different training effect. Is going to have a different effect on you and your fatigue levels. So an athlete who can really learn what recovery zone feels like and the difference between recovery, endurance, and tempo, especially those three. And if you can bring that out to the outdoors, you're going to be in a much better place to train outside. What I see day to day in what I do and when I do consultations with athletes is that sometimes they'll follow a training program. They might follow it quite closely and progress, but sometimes they lack feel. And if I ask them, well, what does endurance feels like? They sometimes struggle with that a little bit, or what they think might be endurance might actually be a little bit closer to tempo. So learn what those zones feel like. Do some time on your own in those zones, and that will help you move forward. So we're going to move into the second part of the presentation. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Oh, okay. So if maybe somebody could throw it into a chat, like, am I coming through okay? Loud and clear? Okay, thanks, Matt. See the thumbs up. Awesome, good stuff. Okay, just getting some messages that I was cutting out a little bit. So we're going to move on to indoor training now, or how do we get the most out of our indoor training? So first is, we want to think about our training environment and a few things to consider. Having some fresh air and cool air will help a lot. So in the winter, if you can be in a room with a window that can open, that'll help tremendously. Having at least one fan, if not two fans, while we're riding inside, we don't dissipate heat very well. And that can add to the training stress. You might find that your heart rate is higher inside. You might sweat a lot, and that might even throw off some of your training zones versus outside. And a lot of that is just heat buildup because we aren't moving through the air like we are outside. Even if it's hot and humid outside, and if we're moving down the road or even down the trail at 20, 25K an hour, we're going to have a lot more cooling effect. So inside, that kind of disappears a little bit. The next part, flooring. Having some foam flooring or even a rocker plate will help a lot with comfort. There's a rocker plate, in short, will move underneath you. It would allow the trainer and the bike to move on several different axes. Some of them are more complicated. There's do-it-yourself rocker plates out there. You can buy rocker plates. They range in price. They can go up into the thousands. That will help tremendously, especially with saddle comfort. There's also some of the trainers nowadays are coming with feet that move a lot. So that movement side to side, fore, aft, just like being outside, will help with comfort a lot and will help tremendously with comfort. So if you do have a lot of discomfort, look into ways to make the trainer move a little bit. A few degrees will help a lot. Entertainment. So usually entails having a screen or multiple screens or some speakers. And whether that's Zwift or an online training platform, Ruvi, RGT, I believe it's called, or even just an old classic DVD player, maybe streaming Netflix, that kind of thing, something to help pass the time will help. Towels for those sweaty rides, that will also help protect your bike as well. And I have another note about that. Our sweat is very corrosive. And for anybody who's ridden a lot inside on a trainer, sweated a lot all over their aluminum bars and shifters, stems, and you take them in the bike shop, they might just give you a really dirty look when you pick it up. I've seen handlebars dissolve after a couple winters of trainer riding. So having towels, having ways to protect your bike from sweat will help a lot. And having side table, having something which is missing from this photo, but having something where you can put your TV remote, your phone, extra bottles, extra food. This is actually one of those times where we aren't necessarily limited by how much we can carry on a bike or how many times we can stop at a convenience store. We can actually have all of our food, nutrition, what we need right next to us if we're organized enough. Another thing I'd like to have is a whiteboard next to me or somewhere within view where I can write out the workout for the day or write out my goals for the day, write out my goals for the training season. It just helps me have those visual reminders of what I'm doing. Maybe have your training zones listed on that whiteboard. Just helps a little bit. Maybe just those little reminders for yourself. So next, and this is something that is somewhat new over the past maybe 10 years, maybe even a little bit less than 10 years, is our online platforms. And the big one that we all know of, I'm sure, is Zwift. There's Ruvi, RGT. I could be missing some out there, but generally speaking, you link in through the internet and you can ride with a community of other riders. And these have been a game changer for indoor training. Something I wish I had when I was training full-time as an athlete. They really do help pass the time, and I do highly recommend them. They do come with usually a fee between $10 to $20 or so. I believe it's well worth it. And you can set up group rides, you can enter challenges, races, pre-programmed workouts. Can really help with the motivation. And using something like Discord is another app for chat. I've been running youth programs for several years now, and this has been one of the biggest changes. Is we used to, and I've taught in indoor training setups, like the cycling gym used to be here in Toronto. We had one up north in Barrie that was similar, where we bring people in with their own bikes, set them up on concrete trainers or what have you. And these online platforms have almost made those a bit redundant, and it's nice to get together with folks to train. But it's allowed a lot more versatility in how I engage with athletes, and especially young athletes. They seem to really jump on these platforms well, and we can meet up once a week. I'm in Toronto now, but I'm training with a group of athletes once a week who are up in Barrie, and they're all in their individual homes, and nobody has to go out in the winter and drive around with their bikes and hooking up trainers. It really has changed indoor training for the better, in my opinion. So a couple of things that you do need for those online platforms, if you're not already on them, you will need a bike of some sort. They'll usually run off of Bluetooth or Ant Plus, so you might need some attachments for your computer, your tablet, or your phone. You'll need a trainer, rollers, or smart bike. Power meters are good. They're a great way to use those, but you don't need a power meter or a smart trainer. All you need to get started is a speed sensor. And as long as you have that speed sensor, you will be able to use these platforms. It'll basically calculate a power for you. They're not super accurate. I'd be cautious of using a calculated power for training unless you know it's very, very consistent. But it will help you get on the platform and get you moving through these worlds. And then a subscription to one of these accounts as well. So chat a little bit about what you'll need. And there's a few different trainers out there right now. So on the far left would be what we call a direct drive trainer. And essentially you would take your rear wheel off your bike, and then you put what's left of your bike and the rear derailleur onto this trainer. And these are very smooth trainers. They're typically very quiet trainers, and they also allow you to do high intensity bouts of exercise and sprints without having your tire slip on a traditional trainer. So if these are in the budget, I would always choose the direct drive trainer over a wheel on trainer, which is pictured in the middle there. That would be a kick or snap, where you basically mount your bike and rear wheel onto the trainer. They're usually a little bit lower cost, but the cost for all trainers is coming down, which is another great thing. CompuTrainers were for years the industry standard, and they cost $2,500, and that was about 20 years ago. So now you can get direct drive smart trainers for they're $500-$600 in some cases. So it's really opened up effective indoor training for a lot of people. So also in the picture in the middle, the fork you can see is attached to what's called a kicker climb, and that will adjust the simulated gradient of your bike, so it'll move the fork up and down. And if you are hooked up to a Zwift or something similar, if you go uphill, the front of your bike will climb or will rise, and that does help with some climbing and the specific demands of climbing, which I'll get to in the next little bit. And the furthest right are rollers, and I love riding rollers. They're fantastic. They are, in my opinion, more comfortable than riding a trainer, again, because you can move more naturally on them. They take a little bit of practice, but they also really do help your pedaling form as well. If you're not pedaling smoothly, you will bounce on the rollers, and you might even come off the rollers. The limitation of rollers is doing high intensity work, sprints, things like that. You might want something more secure, like a traditional trainer or a direct drive trainer. But if you do have access to rollers, or you see some rollers on Marketplace really cheap, like $75, $100, I would highly recommend grabbing those rollers and practicing and doing some riding on them. So some indoor training considerations. I always like to focus on the positives, but I'm going to go through some of the things to drawbacks or things to keep in mind when we are training inside. Indoor versus outdoor training zones, or FTP, can be very different. So especially if you're using different power meters, but even if you are using different power meters, a lot of people find that their outdoor training zones are too hard. So be kind to yourself, be fair to yourself. And my suggestion is that when you move inside, even if you still feel very fit, is that you lower your indoor training zones or targets a little bit as you move inside. Another part of the reason for that is, especially if you're on a trainer, you can't move on the trainer as well as you can outside. So if you think about doing a 1 minute interval outside uphill on the road, you'll naturally be able to put out a little bit more power than versus inside. So be aware of that. And the energy output versus the duration of outdoor versus indoor rides, some of the metrics might actually look lower, like TSS, intensity factor, normalized power. And if those acronyms don't make any sense to you, that's totally fine. Basically just saying that the metrics aren't always going to line up versus outside versus inside. So start making notes of those differences. And some of those may be naturally a little bit lower. Another consideration, like I chatted about, is having a trainer bike as well. If you have an old bike, or again, if you see something on Marketplace that just works, you really just need a bike that fits you and has gears that work. You don't even need brakes. Usually you don't need a front wheel or a rear wheel. And something like that might actually help a lot, saving your nice expensive bike for when it moves outside. And I'd also say too, whenever the opportunity arises in the winter, if you can get outside, do so. Get outside to ride, fat biking, cross training, do those things in the winter. Don't feel like you have to do all of your training inside. Also, your nutrition and hydration will be a little bit different inside, especially the hydration. Sometimes it's easy to forget, but stay on top of the hydration. You might actually need to drink a little bit more than outside. So I'm going to get into some of the training, the benefits, and why we want to train inside. Why, in my opinion, indoor training is some of the best training you will do, physiologically speaking. Is we have a very highly controlled environment. We don't have to worry about cars or stop signs or coasting or groups or dogs, everything. We can really just focus on the effort, and we can actually really learn how to train. And it's very high quality training. So I just put up a quick little chart there of a 45-minute tempo block, and the training effect, and I highlighted about 45 minutes of it. The physiological training effect of that is tremendous versus doing that same workout outside and doing that same workout up and down hills, through stop signs, in a group. Your mitochondria will love that kind of steady state workout, and you can get a lot of bang for your buck inside versus outside. So the next two slides will kind of show that. And again, the outdoor versus indoor difference. If let's say you're used to doing, 2-hour outdoor ride every Saturday in the summer. If you're used to that, then you'll probably get away with an hour 15 to an hour and a half inside to actually get the same training benefit. So if you're used to training more outside and you have to, and if it gets shortened a little bit inside, that's okay. That's completely okay. And you're probably still getting the same training. So really quickly, I use these two slides. This is the exact same athlete a couple weeks apart. They did a 5.5 hour outdoor ride. That was the elapsed time. There's a few stops in there. So they actually did 5 hours of moving time. And the next little box I highlighted there was about 220 TSS and 2,800 kilojoules. And kilojoules is something that I use to measure work done in a ride. It's actually energy spent. So this was, we'll call it a 5 hour ride. Then this was an indoor ride that that same athlete did in about 4 hours. They did a little bit less training stress, but actually more work in that 4 hours. So I use these examples, especially if I have an athlete that's maybe they're training at home on the trainer and their peers, their friends, their racing their racing buddies are off in the sunny California, sunny South, or in Spain or what have you. Is they don't have to do the same amount of volume to get the same amount of training in. And on the other hand, you almost have to do more riding if you're riding outside to get the same training in. So outdoor training weeks and months and training camps isn't quite the same as indoor training. And why we can be a little bit on the short side of overall volume inside, because we're probably getting better training out of it. Okay, we are moving along good. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask in the chat. So some of the drawbacks of indoor training is it can be monotonous. And I think of that as a bit of a mental drawback. Little handling skills required, especially on a trainer. If you ride rollers, that helps a little bit, but generally we lock ourselves to a trainer and we don't really have to think much about it. And then we move outside. Sometimes we're lacking some of those handling skills. Climbing specifics are diminished if we're just on a trainer. So some of the getting into the body mechanics, climbing and the grade changes does change how we pedal on a bike mechanically, our muscular coordination, how we pedal changes, especially as climbs get steeper, and if we get out of the saddle a little bit more. And sometimes we lose a little bit of that on the trainer. And another one is reliance on erg mode if it's used heavily. And this is a big one. I get up on a bit of a soapbox with erg mode. In general, I'm not a giant fan of erg mode, and erg mode quickly is when you let the trainer dictate the power and all you do is pedal. And that can be at a set power or following through a workout. There's a time and a place to use it. But I actually really do like athletes to learn how to produce power on their own. And I'll get more into that on a future slide. So I'm going to go through kind of some tips on each one of those points and how we can help with them. So with it being boring, let's say, and it can be, don't get me wrong, keep your workouts short and sweet. Like I said, you don't have to do the same exact workout indoors that you do outside, especially time-wise. And structure helps pass the time. So whenever you get on the trainer, even if you're a bit rushed getting on the trainer, you're not really sure what you're doing, and you just know you want to be on there for an hour, 40 minutes, what have you. Have some structure in mind, come up with some quick structure, write that on your whiteboard, or in a sticky note on the top tube. And structure can be any combination of power, heart rate, or cadence, and that's RPM. Structure doesn't need to mean high intensity or intervals. Structure can just be cadence structure, fast pedals, spin ups, different pedaling drills, single leg pedaling. And I'll have a couple of examples coming up of what that looks like. For endurance rides, same thing, just break it down into chunks. If you just say, okay, I'm gonna get on the trainer for 40 minutes, yeah, it's gonna be a little bit boring. So add some structure to it. One example of a ride I like to do in that case, indoor ride, is extensive endurance, where I'll just choose a rolling route on Zwift, or maybe one that has a few climbs on it. And I'll make sure that whenever I'm climbing at tempo, meaning I'm just climbing at a good pace. I'm at a productive pace, pedaling with some purpose. Just trying to get up the climb quickly, but I'm not maxed out by any means. I can still talk in short sentences. And then some endurance on the flats. So whenever I'm on the flats, I'm just pedaling along, endurance ride all day pace. And I allow the route to dictate the effort. And that's one tip that I use to keep myself entertained a little bit using the Zwift platform. So here's another one that that is in my Training Peaks workout library. That's a classic workout that I prescribe to many athletes, is just a 2x20 tempo. And again, quickly, like tempo, I've used that term a lot. Tempo is a pace that it's work, you're breathing deeper, it takes some focus to stay at it, but you're not out of breath. And it's a pace that you can maintain for 60 minutes, an hour and a half, but you'd be very tired at the end of the 60 minutes or an hour and a half. And that's what I mean by tempo. It's not your ride all day pace, but it will make you tired. So a classic for me is a 2x20 tempo outside on the road. Whereas if we move inside with some of the athletes who might struggle a little bit, I break that down into different RPM ranges. So different cadences, where I break each of those down into 6-minute intervals. I just to keep it round. And so I move through 70 to 80 RPM, 80 to 90 RPM, and then 90 plus RPM. So I keep the effort around the same, but I ask the athlete to pedal faster during each 6-minute block. And I get what I want done physiologically out of a tempo workout, and I give the athlete some structure to help pass the time. So that's an example of how I would add some structure to help out an athlete, and I do these myself as well. So the next one of the other drawbacks was little handling skills required. Create some time outside, whether that's now or whenever you get a nice day. Even if you jump on a bike share, jump on a Bixie if you don't have an outdoor bike that you can ride, or a fat bike, and just go ride. And that's going to help you stay on top of your riding skills, your basic cycling skills, braking, turning, body position. If you are on a mountain bike or a fat bike, create some time, especially as you get closer to outdoor riding season. Spend more time outside on the bike, even if it's not training, and 20 minutes a few times a week will go a long way. So just go out and play on your bike, and get out there with a buddy, brush some elbows, track stands. Another great one is go to Joyride. If you're in the city, if you're near Markham, head to Joyride once a month, get on one of their dirt jumpers, and that will help as well. So head body separation quickly is, are you able to, ride down the street, maintain a relatively straight line, and turn your head, to the left and right without deviating your line? So just practicing some of those. That's just a basic cycling drill that you may have done in a parking lot or in a park, that kind of thing. So the next one, this always pops up when you have an athlete, or maybe you've experienced this yourself, where you've been on the trainer and then you go maybe somewhere warm for a March training camp or riding vacation with a lot of climbing, and all of a sudden you feel like you can't really climb. What we can do to mitigate that or work on that a little bit is, if we are doing things a little bit more specifically inside, if you are doing some simulated climbs, raise the front wheel, put some books or maybe a 2x4 under your front wheel. That'll actually bring the front of your bike up, and will again change how you pedal on the bike and just start to simulate that climbing. If you have the budget for one, those kicker climb devices are pretty handy as well, that will automatically raise and lower your handlebars. Add in some low RPM repeats and work. That will help when you get out to some climbs and you're grinding up those long climbs. So aim for about 70 RPM, 75 RPM. Be aware of any knee pain, but get used to riding at a low RPM. And there's no substitute for gravity. When you can get outside and go climb some hills, do so. Get used to that body position. Get used to being maybe crouched down a little bit on the bars, moving forward on the saddle a little bit. That will help as well. So quickly, this is perfect timing. We're about 10 minutes left. I have like maybe 2 slides left. So if you do have any questions, start thinking about typing those in, or we can do a bit of a open floor at the end. Reliance on erg mode. And I want to be clear, like I'm not anti-erg mode, but I'm cautious with using erg mode. And as you get closer to your outdoor riding season, that's when I suggest starting to limit your erg mode usage, and to produce your own watts with leg speed, gearing, and some mental grit. One of the things that I find, again, maybe you've experienced this a little bit, is as you move outside, maybe you're doing workouts inside, you move outside and you struggle to do those exact same workouts. If you've been using erg mode to do those workouts, you may have forgotten, for lack of a better term, how your body feels in doing those workouts. So that's why I suggest inside, learn how to do a threshold interval or a VO2 max interval with your own, with your leg speed, gearing, and pushing yourself. It really does help when you move outside. Okay, and as promised, final questions. I am going to stop the share, and then just so I can kind of see everybody who has their cameras on at least, and I can still see your chat as well. So I'm seeing one question. What about training rides in zone 2? Is it a fad? Okay, this is a good one. How many hours do we have left? Is it a fad, something we should all be doing? I find it takes so much concentration to stay within the zone. Yeah, it's also so boring. Do I need to convince myself to love it? Okay, so zone 2 in a nutshell, I would say, I see your hand too, Matt. Do as much as you possibly can. It is not a fad. It's one of those things, like I said, the fatigue resistance is you're gonna start seeing that more. And if there's one thing to help build your fatigue resistance is more zone 2 riding and more endurance riding. Why some people call it a fad, in my opinion, is that they're trying to sell you on time crunch training plans, and they're trying to sell you on, I'm going to make you really fast for 4 or 5 hours a week. And there's just no shortcuts to fitness and building those strong aerobic foundation that you get with zone 2 training or endurance training. And so that's an effort level that you can sustain for several hours. And yes, it can be a bit monotonous, a bit boring to do. So I would do as much zone 2 training as you can handle. I would try to break it up as much as you can using RPM and different challenges on Zwift, remembering your goals, remembering why you're on the trainer. Do as much as you can until you really feel yourself plateau before you start to move on to any other high intensity training. And you can add some zone 3 in there too, like zone 2, zone 3 tempo train. Like you can use, I don't want to say you should only do zone 2 for all winter. You can add zone 3, you can add little bits of the other intensity levels, but you want to almost get to a plateau with zone 2 before you really move on from it. The benefits are huge, especially the longer your event, the more you want to focus on zone 2. So if your event is an 8-hour solo or a 24-hour solo or you know, a marathon type distance, you really do want to put some time in there early in the season. So next question, what would the difference in training be for your 2 Paris to Ancaster clients? Good question. Someone trying to win. The difference between the difference for the second client B would probably be as getting them as comfortable in zone 2 and zone 3 as possible for that 2.5 to 3 hour time frame. I would try to build that diesel engine up so that they're comfortable riding and pushing a really high, you know, close to threshold pace or really high tempo on their own and focusing on their own effort. Versus the rider A, I would focus more on VO2 max and how do I get that rider up the last climb the fastest? So building that fatigue resistance. So once they're good at 2 hours, it's like, okay, now we really got to work on, you know, that last climb. So that would be the biggest 2 differences. The challenge would be with the B rider for sure. The A rider, the rider who can almost win that race, it's going to be a little bit easier. Any particular, so this is the second question, cross training, I would recommend the best cross training for cycling, mountain biking in particular that I can recommend is cross country skiing, especially skate skiing. Anything that adds in some upper body endurance and lower body, even rowing would be good too inside. And the other thing I would say about going back to, and I think it was Ange who asked the question about zone 2 training. Zone 2 training, the biggest adaptations we get from zone 2 training is we can get from any mode of endurance training. So you can do zone 2 training. It can be running up to what you can mechanically handle, meaning up until your knees start to hurt, or maybe that's just me. It can be cross-country skiing, it could be swimming, rowing, elliptical in the gym, treadmill, walking fast. It can be anything. And your heart and your lungs and your mitochondria and your primary muscles don't know what you're doing. So that's another great way to build zone 2. We might be limited where we are. When I was a full-time athlete, it was very lucky because I actually lived up in Barrie, and I actually lived at Hardwood for a while. You know, the house that's there, I actually lived there for winter. I would do a couple specific trainer rides. We had a cool little training center there, and then I'd just go out and ski for 4 to 6 hours, 4 days a week too. So most of my training time, endurance time, was cross-country skiing. Snowshoeing's great. Yeah, anything that gets your heart rate up into a steady, consistent level is great for cross training. So best piece of advice you've given for long hill climbs: start those climbs easy and build into them and break them into chunks. So if we're thinking about like you're on a trip somewhere and you're climbing a mountain, you're down in Asheville, you're climbing a Mount Mitchell or Caesar's Head, and you know the climb, do a little bit of research, jump on Strava, figure out how long that climb is and start to break it down for yourself, and how you're going to get up that climb. And I suggest build into that climb. is probably my best advice. And monitor your cadence as well. Try to ride it at a slightly higher cadence. Don't grind all the way, and recover on anything that's flat. If you're on a long climb with a few flat spots in it, really ease off when it is flat. Don't hammer the flat spots. So I'm going to go to Matt, because you've had your hand up for a while. So ask away, Matt.
Okay, sorry, I was gonna write it down, but my brain just isn't there because yesterday was my first ski of the season. So 18K classic and my brain is wiped. I want to ask you quickly. I listened in one of your other sessions, I think, about intervals, and there you talked about, you said that in your view, you like training, you don't like training plans where it's just a mashup of like all kinds of different things. You said you like focusing on like zone or something like that for a period of like whatever, 3 to 4 weeks, recover, and then switch to another. So I guess the question I want to ask is there a right like approach to periodization of cycling training in the winter? Like, in other words, are there zones that are better to work on earlier in the season and ones that are better to work on in the middle and late, like basically, or is it very rider specific?
So it's a great question, Matt. It is rider specific. The zones that you want to work on that are specific to your event are the ones that you actually want to work on the closest to your event. So so if an athlete is a cyclocross racer, let's say, and it's very short efforts, very short race, lots of punchy efforts, as you get close to that cyclocross event, that's when you're going to be doing a lot of the high intensity work, getting them ready for that cross race. Whereas in the winter, or let's say for a cross rider, spring is going to be a lot of their general preparation phase. So it's going to be a lot of their endurance time, tempo time, versus let's flip it around and say someone's going to be doing a 200-kilometer gravel race. I might actually be doing a lot of the tempo riding or a lot of the pace that's near that gravel pace closer to the event, making sure they're not getting too tired, but more specific, closer to their event. And yes, I do like focused training blocks that are I think I'm seeing some cheeky comments coming in. Focused training blocks that do focus on a particular energy system or a particular zone for 10, 14 days at a time. That isn't just a mashup, because then you know you're working on a specific energy system or part of an energy system that's helping you towards your goal. So mashups are great for keeping us entertained on the bike and on the trainer. And again, this is just my opinion. And if we think about training and training towards a goal in a race, we do want to try to be specific with our training. And so I don't want to say there's a right or wrong way, but we want to think about demands of the event, abilities of the rider, and we want to use that and work towards that event. So going back up, I'll try to skim through these. When it comes to winter training, I prefer getting on the rower or swim. Is that sufficient? You're probably okay, Jeff, to row and swim. It's probably, and another great way is to think of it as maintaining. It's a great way to think about maintaining fitness. If you really want to build more fitness on the bike, you might need to put a little bit more time on the bike. But my advice would be, anytime you do spend on the bike, keep it specific, keep it structured, keep it specific. You probably don't need to do as much zone 2 on the bike. Let's say, just like my skiing example, I did a lot of my hours outdoor skiing, did really specific indoor workouts on the bike. Get back on the bike, Jeff. Okay, so those are the cheeky comments. If I'm faster than Jeff at P2A, can I remind him all about it all summer? Yes, you can. Absolutely. Awesome. So Matt, do you have another question? I just see your hand still up.
Well, actually, I did have one that I was going to throw in there. Do you have an ideal like number of weeks of work versus recovery, or is that again like very dependent?
It is very dependent. It's another great question. Depending on the experience and maybe I shouldn't say experience, the starting point of an athlete's fitness, somebody who's just starting out with a training program, they might start with 10 to 14 days on, or a 10 to 14 day where, okay, this is your training block and a week off. That's a good starting point. Moving up to 3 weeks on, 1 week off would be a range. So between 10 to 21 days would be an on block. And then I see a question, any thoughts on the training plans in Zwift? Do you think they're effective? I do believe they're effective. I believe I have looked through the training plans or a few of them, not every single one or workout by workout. The one caveat I'll say to most of those plans or programs out there is there is an aspect to them that's built to keep you engaged. And sometimes that is using different intervals, using the mashups. So you're working all your every single zone in every single workout, weeks on end. It's better than doing nothing. And if it keeps you engaged, then that's effective. If you come out of the winter fitter with a higher baseline, and excited for the season, then I'll call that effective. I do believe sometimes they do miss a little bit of the specifics and the targeting really specific training zones. It's a conversation that I've had with some of the athletes that I coach a few times. Is they'll sometimes send me workouts that their friends do on other platforms, not just Zwift, but there's a few, and then they say, well, why am I doing just these kind of boring intervals? And sometimes we get on Zoom and chat about it, and it's because I'm targeting something physiologically. I'm targeting a specific point in that athlete's physiology, or hoping to, and we have to hit that a few times. We have to turn that wheel a few times to make sure that we're getting the stimulus that we want to make that change. So, yes and no. They are effective. They're great. Like I said, Zwift and Trainer Road and Sufferfest and all those programs, they've really changed training, and I think for the better. They've changed. If they get people healthier, happier riding inside, then we'll call that a win. Sometimes there's a little bit of personal touch that gets missed in those, and why coaches still exist. I know we're getting to the end, but there was a comment in an online forum the other day about, I want to coach. I want to become a coach, but what value can I add to, they were talking about a specific training program platform. And it was like, well, coaching is a lot more than just a training program. And I'm not trying to push myself as a coach or anything like that, but for all coaches, there's a lot more to it than here's your program, do it. It's the evaluating, no matter how good AI gets, there's only so much that a computer can understand the demands of the event that you're looking for and the abilities of you as a rider. And putting those two pieces together, that's sometimes the art of coaching and the art of developing individual training programs. So are Zwift events beneficial from a training perspective? Great question. So I think one, with engagement, they're beneficial and keeping us on the trainer, keeping us motivated. So if I break Zwift events into like challenges, I think that's great, and that can help pass the time. Zwift races, I think are great at, if we want to just do a threshold effort, if we want to do a power test, sometimes it's better just to jump in a Zwift race instead of doing a 20-minute power test on the trainer. Sometimes I'll just prescribe that, depending on the athlete. It's like, just go do a 15 kilometer Zwift race and just try to hang on, and whatever your power is, that's a good probably metric. And if 6 weeks from now If you do another Zwift race and you're up a category and you push more power, good. So we can use Zwift events to our benefit. Absolutely. Awesome. So I know we're a little bit over time, which is totally okay with me. Are there any more questions or comments? Well, I think we're good.
That was excellent, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I almost want to get on the trainer.
Hey.
And I will, but this is, I think, yeah, it's nice to have like some definitions and the fact that zone 2 is real. Now I'm totally cool with the idea of hanging out in zone 2.
Yeah, like I had an amazing coach when I was younger. His name is Steve Neal. So he ran the cycling gym for the past couple of years before he moved away. He coached me when I was in my early 20s and really taught me about the benefits of zone 2. So it's funny, every couple of years it kind of comes around in conversation, and so he's like, okay, this isn't really new, but truly it really does help. And Steve used to tell me a story about he started working with a professional triathlete who was a bit burnt out and looking for some direction. And when Steve started working with him, he was doing lactate testing and that kind of thing. And he had to tell him, he's like, you know what, here's your running zone. Here's your pace when you go out and running. And this professional triathlete realized, I can't run at that pace. I'm going to be walking. And so the athlete actually started doing all their run workouts at night. So his neighbors and people he knew didn't recognize him out walking for his training. But after a few weeks and after a couple months of buying into that program, his pace was back up. He was running at his normal pace or very close to it, producing less lactate, so on and so forth. So once you really get onto the zone 2 endurance bandwagon and embrace it, there's a lot of benefits to it. One last thing I'll say is, if anybody does want the slide deck, I'm happy to share that. I can send a PDF copy of that to anybody who wants that. I'm happy to share. And yeah, I'll cut myself off.
Great.
That was
Thank
really
you.
great.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
Good night, everyone.